Well, hello, greetings, and welcome to another edition of Conversation Collage, coming to you on your favorite podcast platform. We're on all of them. I'm Ken Johannessen, coming to you from the beautiful, picturesque city of Wenatchee, Washington, the apple capital of the world and the buckle of the power belt of the great Pacific Northwest. And as we speak, it's holiday time. It's right before Christmas. Hope you're having, if you're listening to it at this time, a nice, peaceful, joyous, and safe holiday. I think we've got a good one for you today. I think you're going to enjoy it. We're first going to talk about some good news dealing with COVID, and that is the vaccine. And we're going to focus specifically on the distribution aspects of said vaccine. We'll talk with one of the folks from IBM's blockchain unit. And we'll also have part two of our conversation with Stephen Maitland-Lewis, who we had on our last edition of Conversation Collage, and this time delving into his friendship with one of the greats of jazz. But first, let's start off with talking about the vaccine for COVID-19. The vaccine, or now two of them, have been approved. They are being produced, distributed, and administered. Now, let's talk about the distribution of said vaccines. It includes the tough work of delivering it from production facilities to the people. And that means the need for a very sophisticated and scalable supply chain using blockchain, hybrid cloud, IoT, and artificial intelligence technology. And how is that working? And how does that work going forward? Now, this is not like a traditional vaccine because they have to be kept at very cold temperatures, and they're roughly 70 degrees below zero anyway for the Pfizer vaccine, and it is being distributed through a supply chain known as a cold chain. What are those, and what does technology do with this? We talked about all of this with Jason Kelly from IBM, who leads IBM's global blockchain services, and we talked about the vaccine and how it's getting to us. Jason Kelly, hello.
Hello, Ken.
How are you? Where are you?
I'm doing well, and hope you are also, Ken, and you're reaching me in Austin, Texas.
Is that home base for you?
It is. It's my home.
All right.
And I have been home, like most of us, more than I have ever been at home in my life.
I think a lot of people are saying that these days, and I think we're kind of tired of it, quite honestly. Right. So anyway, nice to have you on board here. We're talking about the COVID vaccines and how they get essentially from the laboratory and the production facility to my arm, and or anybody's arm for that matter, and the role that technology is playing in this. I have not heard of anything that needs to be, any product in any consideration that needs to be kept at 70 degrees below zero while it's being transported. This is something new. Can you explain what this supply chain looks like?
Certainly, Ken. What you have, this thought of vaccine now going from just the vaccine to vaccination, is a journey of trust and confidence, one that none of us can afford to not get correct. And when you have factors such as the one that you mentioned, with required temperature being as cold as 70 degrees below, which is one of the ones that you mentioned, and other vaccines that are being approved also have to be kept at a very low temperature. That low of a temperature is exceptional. And doing it at the scale that we're talking about globally is exceptional. So if that was just it, that would be one challenge that would seem almost insurmountable. But when you also think about the challenge that now you're working with both private sector and public sector having to exchange information so quickly, with information also having to go through so many hands, in some cases, paper-based processes where we start to say, oh, well, there could be a mistake. We start to think about how time-sensitive this is, and where we're thinking about the necessity to save lives. Normally in a supply chain, you think that we want to make sure things are safe so that a life isn't threatened. But now we're not just talking about life-threatening, we talk about life-saving. And so you add those complexities together, and then can you start to get a picture of what we now know is probably the biggest data puzzle in our lifetimes to be solved, which is the data around the vaccine, to make sure that as citizens we have no other concern about that vaccine other than when will I get it, and when I got it, I have received it, and I can show that information that I have received it. So that's what we're dealing with in the current environment.
It says here in my information that there are cold chains, but there aren't enough. We need more cold chains to really get this vaccine to everybody. How soon can this happen? Is this something that can happen in a matter of weeks or maybe a couple of months, that we can develop all these cold chains together and put them together so that everybody can get a vaccine shortly?
Well, I'll give some clarity around that thought. Some of the information that you have is that a lot of the refrigeration capability is not available at the scale that everyone would want it to be. Mm-hmm. And then also the capability around, just think of a cold chain as being a supply chain with cold and refrigeration capability. So that's one and the same. If you don't have enough refrigeration capability and it's in the supply chain, then there's not enough. So the first thing you have to do is understand the data around that. To what extent are you able or not able to distribute the vaccine? And this gets into the depth of what I was mentioning earlier around the data. Mm-hmm. How do you create, and what we have at IBM, a trusted vaccine platform so that you can have the capability to have accountability in every step of the way? Just think of that cold chain as being a series of handshakes. So when Ken wants the vaccine and when Ken can receive the vaccine, all you want to know is that vaccine is safe, and you want to be able to turn around and look all the way through that supply chain, all the way to where that vaccine was originally produced, and see every step of the way that it's good. Mm-hmm. It went where it was supposed to be. It was at the right temperature, and I'm receiving what I think I'm receiving. And that's what my children have translated in their way. Say, oh, so Dad, this technology, mm-hmm. blockchain, is given a birth certificate to that vaccine. And that vaccine, with a birth certificate, as it goes through every handshake, you can know that, in fact, there weren't some cyber criminals involved. There's no counterfeit. Mm-hmm. And when it comes out the other end and you get it, when Ken gets it, it's okay. It's safe. Mm-hmm. That's what's happening now with regards to the capability with a trusted vaccine platform and our vaccine accountability network.
What are some of the other concerns within the supply chain? I mean, you've mentioned a few that there's. I mean, is it a real vaccine? Is this the real McCoy? Is this a counterfeit? Are there other concerns along with this?
We mentioned time and the time sensitivity. Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. There are other supply chains that people talk about, and we've been working with this thought of a supply chain, a trusted supply chain, mm-hmm. something we called food trust for years.
Right.
And we partnered with Walmart. And so if you think about foodborne illnesses, and we've heard that about leafy greens and things of that sort, even at their best, Walmart at one point, seven days were they world class, to find, to track and trace what might be wrong in that supply chain for that food. Well, we don't have that luxury right now with vaccines. And in working with Walmart with food, they went from 7 days to 2.2 seconds to track that in the food supply chain. Mm. That's the type of timing that we need when we think of vaccines, because technology, and that's not just blockchain, but we start to think about the algorithms and demand sensing, as well as the predictive capability that we have with artificial intelligence, AI, and machine learning. Complement that with something called the Internet of Things, mm-hmm. IoT. Mm-hmm. And that's simply, it sounds fancy, but can just think about that container, that's refrigerator. It has its own identity because it has a thermometer and a GPS in it. And you want to know where it was and at what temperature it was during its entire transport from that original birth certificate, right? You mm-hmm. want to know that information. That is what is now happening in this type of technology that's being brought to bear with all of this new data around this vaccine.
Where does this go from here? What can we learn from this, and what can it be applied to in the future, do you think?
Well, what we have quickly is that existing technologies that are now bringing together multiple legacy capabilities. So you have that, an open platform that has been made very apparent here of its importance. And then also where it can go with regards to, at the end of it, you get your vaccine and you're ready to go, you're vaccinated, and in your hand you can have now a digital health pass that says, yes, I've received my vaccine, and some vaccines require a second round, so it can remind you. It's something that we're doing with Salesforce. So you now have this personal medical manager, if you will, in your hand with your data that you can control. So not only do you have that credential, but now take that credential into other areas where now you can return to a theater or you can return to the workplace. Mm-hmm. So this type of data being shared at this level will allow us to strengthen trust, foster equity. We start thinking about the visibility of distribution, as well as speeding the general vaccine access globally.
In other words, to put it very simply, this helps us get back to normal, doesn't it?
It will allow us to get back to some sense of normal, quicker, better, faster. All of us working together, Ken.
Jason, where do we find out more about all of this?
Ken, you and your listeners can go to ibm.com/blockchain and see all of the information we've talked about and how we're working to deploy technologies in a way that will continue to help the world.
Jason Kelly with IBM Blockchain Services, I thank you for a few minutes out. Happy holidays to you. Be safe down in Austin. Thanks for stopping by here.
Thank you, Ken. All the best.
Jason Kelly leads IBM's global blockchain services, partnering with client organizations and consortia to unleash the exponential business value of blockchain technologies and reinvented business process. And we caught up with him in Austin, Texas. If you want more information, you can go to ibm.com/blockchain. And I should mention here that consideration for this interview was provided by IBM. It's Conversation Collage, and I'm Ken Johannessen, and it's very nice to have you with us here. And a reminder that you can like us on Facebook, Conversation Collage Podcast. You can find us on Instagram, Conversation Collage Podcast. If you want to know more about me, there's more about me than you would ever want to know at my website, which is MrK60.com, and spell that out, MisterK60.com. Now, let's pick up the story of Stephen Maitland-Lewis. If you haven't heard our last edition of Conversation Collage, and if you haven't, why haven't you? I would suggest that you stop right now and go back to our previous edition, which starts off with a conversation with him about his novel, his latest novel, which is actually autobiographical. It's called Duped, and it deals with a money laundering scheme which he, Stephen Maitland-Lewis, got involved. It's a fictionalized version of it, but it essentially tells his story, and it's quite fascinating. But that's only a part of the Stephen Maitland-Lewis story. He's done a lot of things. He's been a lawyer. He's been a financier. He's been a hotel and restaurant owner. He's been a marketing manager for a major Los Angeles newspaper. But also, he had a friendship with one of the greats of jazz. And in this segment of our interview, we talk about how he developed and cultivated a friendship with one of the greats of jazz, Louis Armstrong. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in England.
Okay.
I grew up in England, and Louis Armstrong was very, very, very important in my life from the age of about 7 or 8, 9, something like that. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And there was music all the time at home. My mother, my father, my brother, and I, we all had our different favorites, but Louis was mine from that sort of age.
Mm-hmm. Why? What was it about him?
It was a number of things. It was, firstly, the sound. His tone was unique. Now, at that age, I wasn't a musicologist that I could express that in a proper way, but there was something about that tone which was so haunting. And then his voice was unique. Mm-hmm. And the happiness and most of